Welcome back to Emotional Runway, the entrepreneur's guide to mental health. We've been off for a few weeks because I had COVID again. But this week we are back with a fabulous guest, Randy Sullivan, the founder of the Bourbon Real Talk Podcast and community. He's also the co-founder of the Prideful Goat brand of whiskey and so much more. This has been one of my favorite conversations so far, so I hope you enjoy. Hey, Krista, welcome back. It's been a little bit since we saw each other.
So good to see you, Matt. How you doing?
Doing great. Getting over round 2 of COVID. So I can't believe it's only been twice that I've had it now in 4 years. So 3.5 years. So all's well that ends well. Today we are very lucky to have Randy Sullivan joining us. He is the founder of the Bourbon Real Talk community. I am a self-confessed bourbon aficionado. Not nearly to your extent, Randy, but definitely enjoy hunting it, drinking it, collecting it, all those things. And so I have started to watch your content, and I was like, we got to get him on the podcast. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. It's a passion of mine to talk about mental health and entrepreneurship. So I'm just happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I was thrilled that I found somebody who was able to tie together bourbon and mental health. So I jumped at the chance. And Krista, you're probably about to get a bourbon education as the rest of us are getting a mental health education too. So lucky you.
I do have some knowledge of bourbon. So we have a pretty thriving group of parents on our soccer team. The dads, we call them the Bourbon Bros. So when we travel for soccer, they travel to find, like, is it allocated, whatever the word is, bourbon community. So that's kind of their fun to it. So they're actually very excited about this episode and tuning in. So.
Well, that's awesome. Ironically, I started a brand of whiskey called Unallocated as a joke. And the idea was we were going to find good whiskey and sell it to our whiskey club members. And we unallocated it for you. It was going to be hard to find, but we went and grabbed it for you. But every release we've done has been on allocation. So it's kind of a joke at this point. But yeah.
That's so funny.
Well, I mean, there's a whole separate episode to talk about the mental health struggles around trying to find allocated whiskey, but we'll save that for for a different episode. That's stress that we bring on ourselves there. But what really struck me about your story was kind of how you got all of this started. So I'd love if you can kind of give us the background on how Bourbon Real Talk got started.
Sure. So I started off collecting wine. I didn't drink until I was about 28. I was very actively involved in youth ministry at my church, and it was just kind of frowned upon to have alcohol around the house because I always had kids around, and I didn't really care that much about drinking, so I just didn't really drink. When I was about 28, I started to get curious and started learning about wine, started to collect wine, and I'm 45 now. So when I was about, it would have been about 2014, so about 9 years ago, I started getting interested in other types of alcohol. And I kind of settled on Jack Daniels. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's sweet, tastes good. And my younger brother was in the military, and he came home on leave, and I'd never been out drinking with him. This would have been, I was in my early 30s, and he was in his late 20s, so it was odd that brothers had never been out drinking. But we went out and we bonded over Jack Daniels and had this very memorable night. But unfortunately, when he got out of the military, he was badly addicted to painkillers and developed alcoholism, and he ended up taking his own life in 2014. Mm-hmm. And in the aftermath of that, I was trying to find a way to help people feel more connected to the world around them. After his death, all of his friends came up to me at the memorial and pulled me aside and apologized for having pulled away from him because, his behavior had become so erratic and whatnot, and everyone tried to blame themselves. And I started realizing that it was a common theme that people that are in that place of desperation don't feel connected to the world around them any longer. it makes it easier to say, goodbye to it. So I thought, how can I help people feel connected? And I started to see whiskey bring people together, even people that would not normally have formed connections with one another because of, different ideological views and things like that. It just didn't seem to matter when we were all drinking bourbon. And I thought, all right, well, I'm going to do this. And my original intent with the podcast, which is called Bourbon Real Talk, was I wanted to sit down with people of different worldviews and get to know each other over a drink. And what I discovered is that if you had somebody that was, say, Black Lives Matter focused on the Back the Blue people didn't want to listen to that. And that was the point, was that we get to know each other as humans instead of, just demonizing what differences we have. And so eventually I transitioned the podcast to what it is now, which is my job is to get you connected to whiskey, and I'll let the whiskey do the rest of the work and get people connected together. And that has transformed into a very vibrant community. The podcast launched in May of 2019, but we didn't start a community around the podcast until the beginning of 2022. So as of the date of this recording, it's just over a year old. We have a little over 20,000 members, and the vibe in there is very much about connection, and it almost feels like a second family for people. And we do a lot to foster that type of environment. And so, yeah, that's kind of my background and how I got started in all this.
Well, and something really important that I want to point out here for the listeners who are not in the bourbon world, having a Facebook group of any kind related to whiskey where people are nice to each other, in and of itself is an accomplishment. It does not tend to be a community where people are helpful. People are asking like, I just got started and I got this Jack Daniels, like, what does everybody think? And everybody's like, you're an idiot. Jack Daniels sucks. Like, why don't you know better? And it's a community that's very quick to, be all over one another. So the fact that you have cultivated a community, which I am now in, and can attest to the fact that people are actually helpful and nice to each other in and of itself is an accomplishment. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's funny because I conceived of this a long time ago. And as I would talk with people about it, people did not believe it was possible because that troll keyboard warrior type mentality is very invasive in all enthusiast communities. It's not just whiskey.
Yeah.
I have friends that are into barbecue and cars and guns, and it doesn't matter. If you love guns and you go on and you talk about some suppressor, there's going to be somebody else that says, if that's the suppressor you like, you should kill yourself because you're so stupid. And and you're just like, whoa, why is this happening? And I started looking at the numbers because I had a large Facebook group called Someone Say Whiskey that was a club. And there's about a 10 and 10 rule. So about 10% of your membership creates 80+% of your content. And about 10% of those people are your super contributors. And what that made me realize is you might have 50,000 members in a nationwide group, but the reality is there's only 500 trolls that are creating 90+% of the content that you're seeing. And what does that mean about the other 49,500? I always believed that there were good intentioned people that wanted to have a normal discourse and community inside that 49,500 that were totally being marginalized by the lack of moderation from the group. And no one believed me. And I ended up doing it inside Bourbon Real Talk. And now look at us, 20,000 members strong. And soon as somebody gets, to flaring up the drama and being hateful, the community regulates it now. So It's very interesting.
That's incredible. So how long have it's been a year since you started the podcast?
The podcast started in May of 2019.
Okay.
But because I already had a Facebook-based whiskey group that I co-founded called Someone Say Whiskey, I hadn't started a forum for podcast viewers. But as the podcast grew, the the groups of the two groups were less and less overlapped, and there came a point where, for the benefit of the podcast itself, it needed its own discussion forum, and so that's why
Sure.
until 2022.
What was, go back to when you started drinking, you said, or like started exploring different types of alcohol. What was the response from your family? Because if you've gone, if that wasn't something you were doing, I mean, I'm curious to know what that was like.
All of my family were drinkers, so I think they were relieved.
Okay.
I think that I made them
Finally.
because we would get together for family gatherings and they'd all be drinking, and I'm like, "Do you have water?" But in the beginning, no, there was no concern, there was no pushback. But as of late, my job now, in some ways, is to drink. I own part of 2 whiskey brands. I have to drink for the podcast. Everyone who is a fan of the show wants to drink with me when they're together, right? And so
Yeah.
I've had to make some adjustments to my drinking habits recently, just for physical health reasons. So there were some family members who are like, "Are you sure you're good? Like, do you need to make some changes?"
This is not how it started with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I tend to be an
Okay.
extreme person, so I'm all in or I'm all out. So I
All or
gotta be
nothing.
careful. I got the collector gene, and that translates to a little bit of an addictive nature too. So every hobby I've ever gotten into went 50 fathoms deep. But I think that the whiskey is here to stay.
Would you say you're a perfectionist?
No, I would characterize myself as a driver. I have people who work for me who have shown me that I'm not a perfectionist, because I'm sometimes good enough is good enough. Like, let's go. Let's go. We have to let's put it out there and see what happens, and we'll fix all the broken stuff later. And so in the past, I would have said I was a perfectionist, but dealing with people that are like, "Hey, pump the brakes. We're not sure that this is fully ready yet." And I'm like, "It's never going to be fully ready. Let's go." So I'm more of a driver, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think speaks to like really thriving in the entrepreneurial space, right?
Right.
It kind of propels you forward rather than sometimes hold you back. So.
Yeah, that is definitely a hallmark. I've worked for other entrepreneurs in times past, and as their employee, it was frustrating, where they would have the whole marketing plan and videos and all that stuff shot and want to release it, and they haven't created the underlying product yet. I'm like, no, that's not how we do this. So there's definitely some balance in there. You can be extreme on either end. You can get paralysis by analysis, or you can just be too hard charging and border on irresponsible with your customers. So
Sure.
I try to thread the needle and be in the middle.
You are, so I think it's important to point this out. So in addition to the podcast and the community, you are an entrepreneur on several fronts. So you run a real estate team and also are part of 2 whiskey brands. And what else? You got a lot of stuff going on as an entrepreneur in addition to this.
Yeah. So I started, so I was a real estate agent full time, and that was part of the reason why I was able to transition and build the podcast, because when you're a real estate agent and you're new, you spend probably 70 or 80% of your hours trying to find new customers. But once you've been in the business for 10 plus years, you get enough referrals and your time starts to free up a little bit more. And it was kind of on accident. I helped one of the prominent whiskey members buy a house. And I thought, I should give him something nice. And I gave him a really rare bottle of whiskey. It was George T. Stagg. And I didn't have any expectations of it. He was just my friend, and I wanted him to be happy, and I was grateful for the business. And he posted a picture of it in the local whiskey community, and I got like 3 or 4 new clients out of it. And I was like, wait a minute. So I can redirect all of my marketing budget to buying rare bottles of whiskey and give them away to my friends, which makes me happy as a lark. And that's going to get me all the business I need? Like, awesome. And
dude,
so,
I'd hire you as a realtor if you gave me if I knew there was a bottomless tag at the end of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've given out everything you can think of. Pappy 15, 20, Eagle Rare 17, Thomas Handy, all kinds of stuff. So that was kind of, a turning point for me. But I also started a funding company. And as a real estate agent, as the market shifted from being investor focused to owner occupant focused in like 2012, 13, I started coming across a lot of sellers whose houses were not ready for the market, but they needed to invest some money in the house to really take advantage of the opportunity. And too many people didn't have access to the cash or credit. And I had investors that I'd made a lot of money for in years past when the market was ripe for that. And I decided to marry the two together. So I started a funding company. I took my investors' money on account. I have an operating agreement that allows me to invest it. And I started effectively helping homeowners flip their own house so they didn't have to make the terrible mistake of selling to We Buy Ugly Houses or Redfin or any of the other companies that offer you cash up front. Always a scam. They make their money off of your equity, period, point blank. There ain't no other way to put it, right? But if somebody like me could come in and provide the capital that you don't have, and that's what motivates you to do business with people like that, then I can let you keep your equity, take a small piece of it for the extra work that got put in, and you walk away a lot better off, and everybody wins. So I started doing that, and that grew into funding some startup businesses. And one of them was a fire restoration company, and it was doing very, very well on paper. And I found out on June 6th, 2022, that one of the original founders, who I considered a personal friend, I'd stay at his house and everything, had been embezzling money for a very long time. And he had embezzled about $1.5 million, and it ended up bankrupting the company and completely wiped out the overwhelming majority of my investors' money. And, you want to talk about entrepreneurship, people say they want to be their own boss and whatnot. You want to talk about mental health. I couldn't have been in a darker place, betrayed by somebody I personally trusted, my name dragged through the mud, people that I care about losing money, some of which they didn't have to lose. They bet on me. And, that is the reality of entrepreneurship, is that if it were easy, everybody would do it. And you have to have a big enough why behind what you're doing, other than money, because the money's not going to seem important whenever your whole life's falling apart. You have to have a bigger why behind what you're doing. And that's the thing that you've got to latch onto in those dark times to get you through to the other side, because there's always a brighter day. But yeah, so that's kind of my entrepreneurship background, is real estate, funding company, podcast. The podcast, I think, came after I started realizing how to use whiskey to market my real estate business.
No, it's a brilliant idea. Yeah. No, but I mean,
and anybody can do it in any enthusiast community, really. I mean, but and then the podcast transitioned into the opportunity to start the Prideful Goat, which is behind me. That's a brand. We're distributed in 8 states. We're negotiating for distribution about 7 other states right now. 2 online retailers. A pretty large brand. First year we did around 6,000 cases, which isn't bad. So it's also about being open to the opportunities as they come along. So
you hit on some stuff there that I think is super important, and stuff that we talk about here a lot, which is, there really has to be a why here, to be an entrepreneur, because it is not an easy journey. For me, honestly, in the time where, I was feeling a lot of the same things that you were, which is people bet on me, investors took a chance on me, and for reasons outside of my control, one of which was the pandemic, which obviously was outside of all of our control. things weren't going great. And I felt like that was on me personally. And so, but my pride and what kind of kept me going through all of it was the fact that we're helping firefighters and police officers, go home to their families at night. And that was more important to me than, my own, I could get out of my own way in some ways to serve that higher mission. So I think that's absolutely critical. And like I said, something we've talked about a lot. In our previous episode, we had a gentleman, Sunil Gupta, join us who has written an amazing book about entrepreneurship and as an entrepreneur himself. And, he talked about inner success versus outer success and, how it really takes both to want to get on this journey. And I think that's super important. So, good for you for recognizing that and kind of using that as a springboard to do something really cool for the community.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't, every business venture that I've gotten involved with, there have been times, well, I mean, I'll just give you the speech. People ask me all the time about starting their own business or becoming a real estate agent, or now people ask me about starting a podcast. And, I tell people, one, you need to know why you're doing it. And it can't be because you want to control your own work hours or because you like money. Because when times get tough, only insane people stick with it, right? You literally have to almost have a form of mental illness where you're so committed to this higher calling that it will, force you to go through it. But I tell people, you just need to understand that before you get to where you want to go, there will be a day where you will look yourself in the mirror and you will not like what you see. And you will say to yourself, I have irrevocably fucked up my life. And if you don't have a big enough reason to have that conversation with yourself and finish getting ready and go hit the pavement and keep on grinding, then don't start. Just do what normal, logical people do and go get a job that pays you the most amount that you can get for your time. Mm-hmm. But you have to have that bigger why or you'll never make it through. And I can't think of a single business venture that I've ever been involved with where I haven't been in a position where I was just overwhelmed with anxiety and stress and saw no path forward. And I'm starting to learn to live by faith that when there is no way, somehow a way presents itself.
It's so good to hear that. I mean, to be honest with you, it's so nice to hear that. And I think this is, and I tell Krista this probably every episode that like this podcast is as much for me as it is for the audience because this is therapy for me. Just because everybody's like, oh, you don't need another thing. You're taking on another thing. And I was like, no, you don't understand. This is the most important thing because, this helps me kind of get through it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, look, I think it was one of the sharks on Shark Tank that said entrepreneurs are the only group of people that work 100 hours a week, so they don't have to work 40 hours a week. And that is, it is so true. And I have been where you're talking about, and I've had to condition my brain to say, you've been here before, you survived, you found a way, you're going to find a way this time, and just keep on trucking. And that's what we're doing. And, I consider myself lucky or dumb enough to have stuck it out and things are starting to turn around in my business, which is a great place to be. But man, that's such an important message is just to, you got to stick with it and you got to, remember why you did this in the first place.
Sure.
Yeah. I like what you said about just having faith, right? And I think what we don't talk a whole lot about, which is so important to being able to thrive, is having a sense of spirituality and just knowing what things in your life you can reach to when you're hitting those rough times. When you started off, I had said I listened to I think it's Bourbon Real Talk episode 2, which is, are we drinking too much? And there you shared a lot about just really being really vulnerable and upfront about probably referring back to, the investment issue and whatever, in times you were really struggling, those dark times. Can you talk a little bit about what things, in addition to your faith, kind of got you through those times?
I wish I had a clear answer. To be honest, I don't know. I mean, I started listening to The Secret on repeat. Just the idea of keeping your thoughts positive with the attempt of manifesting positivity in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that The Secret helped me a lot, but they talk about having an attitude of gratitude and say the things you're thankful for before you get out of bed, even when you feel overwhelmed by the bad things. And I mean, there was even a point where my daughter just got accepted to Texas A&M, which is where I went to school. And I was like, why am I not happy about this? And I was so overwhelmed with the sequence of bad things that had just happened in my life from people who owed it to me to not let that happen. And they did what they absolutely knew was wrong. And there was nothing I could have done to stop it. Mm-hmm. Years worth of effort that I built something just destroyed by somebody else. And I became so overwhelmed with the thought of seeing my daughter and my son having those same types of struggles in life that I couldn't even think of a positive future. Right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't exactly know. I kept, trying to use the power of positive thinking, getting up in the morning, saying my intentions, right? And the first thing that I say every morning, well, I usually do my goals last, but after I pray and I read a Bible verse, which I don't publicize that. I don't even talk about that on the podcast because I don't think that it's important for me to speak into people's lives for them to know what my personal motivations and faith are. But I say I will use the power of positive thinking mm-hmm. to form my perfect life, right? Every morning I say that to myself. And there were days where I'd wake up and I'd feel that weight on my chest and I would go, oh, I get to say the thing, right? And maybe today it'll be true. And it just gave me a little bit of hope. There was even a time where I would, when I was having and this is a dumb thing to do because it's a waste of money, but I just needed something to give me a little bit of hope. And when I couldn't think of anything, I'd go buy a lottery ticket.
Did you ever win?
Oh, no, but that's not the point, right? It gave me something positive.
Yeah, to look forward to, right?
To ponder, right? You know? And then when the day came and went and I lost, if I didn't feel better, I'd go buy another one. There's like $1. I could buy hope for $1, right? And so that was, those were some of the things, but I go to counseling once a month, whether I need it or not. Everybody needs it. Mm-hmm. And so I was talking with my counselor, and she started bringing up times in the past that I had struggled, and she had seen me find a way through it. And there was just some switch that flipped in my head that was like, what if you live by faith again? Right? What if you really was able to live with this peace in the back of your mind that even when it's bad, it's not that bad. And when it looks hopeless, there's always something that happens. You've never gone without food. You've never not paid your mortgage. It's going to be all right. And good things started happening once I started shifting my thinking. And I don't know if it was the good things that helped me to shift my thinking or if my thinking helped me to create the good things. I don't think it matters. I just started trying to focus with as much intent as possible on manifesting good things.
Well,
and I think the meaning and purpose, right, of the community you built. Sometimes when you go through really hard times, if you can even focus on that, right, like you're creating greater good and you're putting good things out there. And I think that does ultimately, I believe, comes back to you, you know?
Well, it was a weird experience to have because I present this, the very positive message at the end of every one of my podcasts about having lost my brother, and that I want this show to get you close to whiskey so that no one feels alone and everyone feels connected and all that stuff. And so there are people that strongly resonates with, and they do send me messages from time to time. And, I'm in this place where I'm like, just absolutely feeling zero hope for the future. And I've got people emailing me saying I was suicidal and you helped me.
Yeah.
And there were even times where I would get that and I'd read it and I would cry because I'm like, if you knew how worthless I really am, and you're ascribing all of this good to me, and I feel like there's no good in me, and so, but that's another point, is that when you are saying something encouraging to someone else, you never know what impact you're.
Well, and I never, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I never expected any of this to come from me just putting this out there. And I mean, this is a testament to the fact that, like, even though I'm not feeling great about myself, or I'm not feeling great about what I've done, I've somehow managed to parlay it into something that might help another person, which makes it all worth doing.
Sure. Yeah. And you are having, a big impact on people. Just hearing other entrepreneur stories is crucial. I've listened to biographies of every successful business person in U.S. history that I can find. And guess what? Every one of them has a very, very dark time. Very dark time. And hearing those other stories of triumph also, have helped me.
I think, all of that is just, is so critical. I would, imposter syndrome is the word that kind of comes to mind for me always when we're talking about this type of subject. Is like, I feel like you said, I'm, the things weren't going great at one point, and man, I screwed this up, and man, I got myself in this hole, and my family's not going to be okay, and all this kind of stuff. And then people would comment on stuff that I'd put on LinkedIn and say, like, wow, man, you're really making a difference in the community. And you're like, man, if you knew how much I felt like shit here reading that. I mean, I appreciate the sentiment, but like,
right.
But then I realized, at some point I had this realization, like, man, how arrogant is that for me to be like, look, everything that I've done for the community doesn't matter because I'm not feeling good about myself. And the truth of the matter is that, in 9 or 10 years that we've been doing this work, in the drone world, we have made an impact. We have helped people save lives. We have helped first responders go home safely at night. And who gives a shit whether I'm sad about it? To be honest with you, we've made a difference, and it's it's sort of incumbent on me to get over that. And I think that's what really helped me, is to kind of have that moment of self-reflection and go, like, man, it doesn't. Yeah, this is hard, right? Like, if it like you said, if it were easy, everybody would be doing it. But like, get over yourself and keep doing the work. And if if you run out of track at some point, then you do, and you deal with it. But in the meantime, you're helping people, and that's what's important.
Yeah. And that's why every so often somebody will be trashing business, usually in political season, and I'll lose it and go on a rant, and it'll be somebody complaining about, like, my boss drives the such and such car and I only make this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but have you ever thought about killing yourself because you were trying to make this company work? Probably not, but I bet he has. Yeah. So, it's tough. It's definitely tough, but if you have the right reasons, it'll get you through those tough times. And then, hearing stories like this, because the reality is we've all gone through tough times. We've all gone through times that we saw no way forward, and we've all made a way forward.
Yeah.
Things just have a tendency to work out, and that is the thing that I hang my hat on. And also my wife. I've been married for 24 years, 25 years this year, in August. And, you know, there was a point at which she was like, you're going to figure it out. Like, it's fine. It's going to suck for a while. It's all right. You know,
this theme keeps coming up too, Krista, right? This is not the first time we've had this conversation where, you know, you're like, man, I'm such a screw up. I lost everything. And they're, you know, our wives or our spouses or partners or whatever, like, whatever, like,
right.
it's
I'm
fine.
like, why
We'll
are
figure
you
it
not
out. Like,
freaking out? Like, why are you should be totally freaking out. But she was like, so what are we having for dinner? You know? And there's this thing in the back of my mind. It's like, well, I guess she's never had to worry about whether or not there'd be dinner. There's just always been dinner, right?
yeah.
Which is an oversimplification of the entire ecosystem. But it's like, I guess this has always been the thing that I've worried about. But does it say something to me about how I'm looking at the situation, that this person that's totally dependent on the outcome just assumes that you're going to figure it out, right? And there was some of that too that helped. You know, there's like a counseling session, because I guess I've never really broke down what got me through it, and now I'm having to think about it.
I told you, emotional runway is like therapy. So, and Krista doesn't even charge for this.
No, so.
Right.
What gets you through it? It's been all over social media. I don't know. It's essentially the Harvard study of adult development. It's been the longest longitudinal study going, and it focuses on health and human connection. And this study's been going for like 85 years. I mean, an insane amount of time. It's out of Harvard Medical. And they do say having a social connection, a sense of community, repeatedly shows people live longer, have less stress, they're happier, better brain health, better quality of life. So, you know, I think being part of a community, which is amazing that you started, you know, with Bourbon Real Talk in the bourbon community, that alone, I think, you know, it's social connection. That's what we need. You know, we need to combat loneliness. How do we do that? You know, we need to make connection accessible, which you're doing. It's phenomenal what you're doing.
And we bring the community together around causes too. So we've raised over the years $102,000 for organization that provides equine therapy service to disabled children and veterans.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And you know, we raised over $15,000 a few months ago for a support organization that helps children that are getting cancer treatments. And the community will coalesce around those ideals that are bigger than us. But what helped us foster community was, one, we created the environment where it was possible for it to grow, and two, we've encouraged people to perform acts of kindness, and to publicize it in the group. And so one of the things that was funny, it was totally unintentional. I went to a fundraiser. I got invited to a fundraiser, and I didn't know anybody there. And I'm walking around, and I've got my bag full of whiskey. They're my whiskeys, you know. And I'm trying to find a table to hang out at. And, well, I'll just go ahead and tell it. That y'all remember that terrible air show accident that happened in Texas a few months ago?
Yeah.
Well, I was at that event the year before. And the table that I ended up at was the table of all of the pilots that died in that wreck this year. And they were really awesome. And I was talking with them and all that stuff. And I shared some whiskey with them. And then I had gotten to know everybody, so I got up to move and meet more people, and I saw the cool kid table. This was the table that his dad owned the hangar, and it had the most people, and they were the loudest and most boisterous. And I walked up, and I was like, "Hey, what are y'all doing?" And one of the beta males like tried to make fun of me in front of the group, and I was like, "I don't want to hang out over here." And so I went walking, and I see a table, and there's this giant Hispanic dude, bald-headed. And he's got a wrestling belt that is laid out on his table. And I walk up and I'm like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Oh, that's for my cigar club." And I was like, "You got a cigar club?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "I got a whiskey club." He's like, cool. I said, you just go out and start a whole club because no one told you you couldn't? And he's like, pretty much. And I was like, me too. He's like, you want to have a seat? And I was like, yeah. So I sit down, and there's two other dudes that are sitting at the table, and they end up getting out this coin. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, oh, these are my challenge coins. Everybody who's part of my cigar club gets one of these coins. And I was like, well, how come yours is gold and his is silver? And he's like, well, only me and my two consiglieres have gold, but all the other members have silver. And I was like, that's awesome. So we sat there and we're shooting the breeze. I let him try my whiskey. And he reaches in his pocket and he hands me a silver coin. And I was like, so what does this mean? Like, if I get a call in the middle of the night, just show up with a shovel and don't ask any questions? And he was like, yeah, pretty much. And I was like, I'm down, right? Like, and I just remember how impactful that was. And so what I determined to do was I wanted to integrate that into building community and this idea of having a focus on kindness. And so we have these challenge coins. I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah.
But on it says connected through bourbon and official force for good. And I started having these coins minted. And because the podcast sells merch, we do have capital that I can invest in building community if I want, and I do. And we have a moderation team that watches what's going on inside the community. And when somebody does something kind, whether it be, giving somebody a sample or hosting a bottle share at their house, or, we get word that they helped somebody while they were struggling during a dark time or whatever, we send out these coins for free. You can't buy them. And we had the coins made in different colors, and the different colors represent different kind of achievements, if you will, of kindness. And we don't tell people what you have to do to get the coins, right? So when people ask, we're like, well, we're not trying to pay you to do nice things. We're trying to get you to start thinking about looking for opportunities and encourage you to take them. And then one day a coin may show up in the mail, right? And that's been a very successful program for us to help, drive home that our forum is more about community and connection and about using the platform to do good in the world over everything else.
Well, that's awesome. This is last year's, but I happen to have my Skyfire coin right here. So I knew you and I would get along as we both are into whiskey and challenge coins. So
Yeah.
I will definitely I'll send you a Skyfire coin when we're done here. But it's such a I can speak to that too. I understand that the look on people's face when you give them a coin for no reason other than, hey, you've made an impact on my life, and I'd like to give you this little token of my gratitude. So it's a really cool thing.
Yeah, and I have a unique challenge because my platform is fraught with danger for people who are struggling with mental health issues. And so it's kind of a catch-22 because a large percentage of people who are struggling with mental health do turn to drugs and alcohol to help them get through it, and that will cause them to find my platform. But I then also feel obligated to record pieces like the one that you referenced, where I talk about the dangers of drinking too much, right? And so that is kind of a thin line to try to walk in my position, because I want people to make their own decision about how much they drink, how often they drink. I don't think you have to be a heavy drinker to really get engaged in the enthusiast community. And in that regard, I feel good about encouraging people to get involved, but also regularly reminding people, you have to make good, healthy choices.
Yeah.
Actually, that's something I wanted to ask you about, Krista, too, because I know we were sort of talking about this before getting Randy on, there is a fine line here between community and substance abuse. And what are your thoughts on that too? Because I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of people who are turning to substances, as he mentioned, to deal with some of this stress.
Yeah, and I should mention, I didn't before, but my background also is working a lot with military and first responders. So it's a real issue, especially in those types of professions. So, what I see a lot in the office is people coming in and they just, most of which they're lonely, right? Like they're drinking and they're not having people around them that they feel like there's a source of support. And when you don't have people around you to kind of like check in with you, right? Things can get easily out of hand. Like you have no awareness, right? Like your awareness is not developing of like what's going on. And maybe this is like one too many, for example, like when you start having issues with your relationships, at work, or you're missing work, or, you're having possibly suicidal ideation, you're not sleeping well. Those are really all the things that you're kind of looking at as to maybe I need to kind of go check in with someone. Randy, you mentioned getting a counselor. For some people, that's a great option. For other people, it's simply like know who the people you keep company with that are around you that give a shit, really, that care enough to say, hey, pull you aside and see what's going on, I notice you don't seem like yourself.
Well, and we monitor for some of those warning behaviors in the group.
Yeah.
We don't allow any displays of irresponsible drinking. So for a long time, it was very popular to do what they call bottle chugs.
Yeah.
Where you open up a expensive bottle of whiskey and you show everybody how little you care about it being expensive whiskey by drinking a bunch of it all at once. And I don't like that for a few reasons. One, because there's a lot of people who see that display and think, man, I would have sipped that and really savored that with you, and I'll never see that bottle. And it just creates division. But two, people don't realize humans have been drinking alcohol for somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000 years. But its mass availability didn't really come until civilizations developed and we developed agriculture. And distilled spirits are not very old at all. And so it can be dangerous, and you do need to be thoughtful about it. And it's not right at all for some people. But when you talk about entrepreneurship, historically, business deals, treaties, anytime two groups have come together for a greater good together than apart, historically, almost always includes alcohol. Almost always. And there is a lot of research that shows that we're communal creatures by nature, and alcohol does relax the PFC, which is the part of the brain that logically says, hey, caution, be careful. And it's also been shown that people, when drinking, are better judges of character. And when the person that they're judging has also been drinking, it makes it a lot easier for you to determine, is this a person that I want to be in business to? I want to be in a relationship with. And so there is a role that it can play. But obviously, drunk driving, all manner of crime goes up when there's, heavy alcohol abuse. So, we got to be careful. But you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's all very important to point out. And I think now, we've covered you buying lottery tickets, alcohol abuse. So there's going to be we have to put a lot of disclaimers at the end of this podcast. So if you have a problem with any of these things.
I talked about guns for a second too. You might have to disclaim that.
Yeah.
We'll disclaim everything. So
there you go.
This has been great. I really just appreciate your perspective on things. And really just kind of looking at this from a different perspective. I mean, obviously coming at it from an entrepreneur, but as an entrepreneur, but also as somebody who's dealt with mental health struggles in your family and suicide and things like that, and sort of understanding the connection is really the most important piece that threads this all together. So Is there anything else that we didn't get to that we want to talk about here?
I would say one other thing, when you mentioned the disclaimers, one thing that I've spent a lot of time thinking about is what causes division and separation, right? And I know what starts it in at least online communities, and it's when someone shares a dissenting opinion without being asked. So we have a rule that you cannot share a dissenting opinion unless you're asked. And if you want to share a negative opinion, that you have to share it in terms of your opinion and not general fact, because you have to leave space for others to not feel alienated by your opinion. And that is a very important thing for entrepreneurs that are trying to connect with other people. You have to leave space for other people to think differently than you, or you're cutting yourself off from tons and tons of opportunity. And there is a way, I personally believe, for someone who hates guns and someone who loves collecting guns and shooting, or somebody who's strong on the Black Lives Matter front, or someone who's strong on the Back the Blue front, to honestly engage with one another and be able to still have connection despite those differences. And I think that's important. And I do put disclaimers in almost every one of my podcasts. And I've had some more politically divisive topics that had come up in my podcast. And yes, I gave disclaimers. But for those of you that are out there watching, if your mindset is such that, you're going to discount what I said because I used a gun analogy, you're really cutting yourself off from a lot of the opportunity that's out there. Because I think, and my original premise for Bourbon Real Talk was, if you just sat down with that person and had a drink and you talked about what you want for your marriage and your kids and your business and, your family and the people that you love, you're going to agree on 95% at least. Yeah. And there's no reason for you to cut people out of your life, especially as an entrepreneur, over the 5% that quite honestly will probably never come up and really doesn't matter. Yeah. So just love each other.
Well, and that's such an important message, and I think it's something that has truly been lost, as the political discourse in this country has gone off the rails, no matter which side of the aisle you sit on. That 95% of us agree on 95% of the things, and we get so caught up on the things that we disagree about and disagree about so loudly. So I think that's such an important point. And as you end all of your podcasts by telling the community that you love them, I love you guys, and I love all the listeners that are listening to us today. And I think it's so important just to point that out, that people are here to listen. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this podcast, and thank you so much for being a part of it, for helping contribute to that discourse. And, I just really appreciate everything you're doing. And, we just met, but I'm already a huge fan, and I look forward to sharing. What's your favorite whiskey? I forgot to ask you that. What's your
George
your go-to?
Stagg is my favorite. So I don't get the opportunity to buy it very often because it's very rare. But
It is.
it is my favorite.
I just got my first Stag Junior, or Stag, I guess is what you call it now. I am an E.H. Taylor guy through and through, but have had the opportunity to try some George T. Stagg and loved it. So, Krista, how about you? What's your favorite whiskey?
I don't know that I'm qualified to have a favorite, but I did like Blanton's when I tried it. That's probably, yeah.
It's a bottle right behind Randy there on the shelf.
So yeah, that was one of our, I think that was New Year's. The Bourbon Bros had a vast selection for sipping and tasting. So that was probably my favorite. Yeah.
I would recommend that you try Angel's Envy Rye.
Okay. I'm writing this down.
Yeah. This has been the number, when I survey my community, and I say, women, what was your gateway whiskey? Many women say this was their gateway whiskey. And
okay, give it a try.
It tastes like Christmas in a bottle. It's like clove and nutmeg and cinnamon and sugar cookie, and it's just sometimes they taste a little like bananas flambe. But it's pretty approachable stuff. So often if a husband and wife come over and she's like, "Oh, I've never found a whiskey I like." Okay, I'm gonna give you one, but if you hate that one, then we're just done. Like I can't. I'll go open a bottle of wine for you. So yeah, but yeah, I'd recommend any whiskey curious woman out there. If you're wanting to dip your toe, I'd check out some Angels If You Rye.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Krista, you and I live 20 minutes apart. I have quite a whiskey collection. So when you come over, I will line up a tasting for you. And
appreciate that.
And Randy, next time I'm in Texas, actually one of my good friends and investors is in College Station. He's a big Aggies guy. So Great. Next time I get to Texas to see him, I will make sure that I give you a ring and we can get together and try some stuff.
Find a way to cross over. You're welcome to come check out the Whiskey Well anytime you want.
We actually did our own, we did a single barrel Maker's Private Select Skyfire. It was, the flavor profile was chocolate chip pancakes in honor of our firefighter friends. So nice. I will make sure I bring some with me when I head your direction. So
yeah, I just completed one myself. So we're excited for that to come in.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Krista, as always, pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
And if anybody would like more information about Bourbon Real Talk, where can they find you, and how do they take advantage of all of your knowledge?
So I've got a website, bourbonrealtalk.com. You can also most of my following is on YouTube. So we've been growing pretty quick lately, but as of this filming, we're at 43,500 subs, I think. And it's YouTube /Bourbon Real Talk. And then we're on all the podcast players. But if you want to get involved in the community on Facebook is called Bourbon Real Talk Community. And that'll take you to the group. And we do vet your profile. So if you just started your Facebook profile, you probably won't get approved because a lot of people come in there trying to scam the membership and, try and sell them a bottle that they're never actually going to mail. They just steal the money and all that stuff. So we do our best to keep the scammers out. But,
all the fun stuff that comes along with the whiskey community, and as you said, every other enthusiast community.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you can find links to everything on the website bourbonrealtalk.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. If you like what you hear and you have any suggestions for us for future episodes, you can email us at emotionalrunway@gmail.com. And of course, we are available anywhere where you can find your podcasts. Thank you both for joining us, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.